He stole my innocence and almost took my life. Even today, when I close my eyes, I feel those large, dirty hands choking me. But before I begin this story, I want you to know that I survived to tell it. And if you're going through something similar, I want you to know you can survive too. My name is Constance Peterson Smith, and I'm 78 years old today. But my story begins when I was only 9. Everyone here in Cedar Creek, this little piece of Kentucky hidden along the banks of the Ohio River, knows me as Miss Connie from the pharmacy. For over 50 years, I was the only pharmacist in town, the one who helped everyone with their health problems, from a passing fever to the most complicated deliveries. Looking at me now, with this fragile body, white hair, and wrinkled like a raisin, no one would imagine that I once carried a secret so heavy it bent my back much more than the weight of age. I was born in 1947 to a simple but respected family. My father, Arthur, was a carpenter who could transform a rough piece of wood into a work of art. My mother, Josephine, sewed for the wealthier families in the region. We were poor in money but rich in dignity, as my father always said. We lived in a small but decent house made of brick with a shingled roof with only 3 rooms. The living room that doubled as a kitchen, a bedroom where my parents slept, and another where I shared a straw mattress with my 2 older sisters, Teresa and Louise. Life was simple, but it was good. We woke up with the rooster's crow, ate what we grew in our backyard, and went to bed early, lulled by the sounds of crickets and frogs. Our routine only changed on Sundays, when we went to Mass at the little church in the square, and once a month when we had lunch at my paternal grandmother's house, Grandma Antonia. These lunches were a family event. They gathered all her children, my father and his 4 siblings, with their respective families. It was a day of abundance, of eating until you couldn't anymore, of laughter, stories, and for us children, of playing with cousins we rarely saw. Grandma Antonia's house was on a large plot of land, away from town, with an orchard in the back that seemed like a little piece of paradise to us children. It had apple trees, peach trees, cherries, berries, any fruit you can imagine was there. The house itself was large, one of those old ones, with many rooms, a porch that wrapped around everything, and a dirt yard where chickens scratched freely. On that fateful Sunday, I woke up excited. It was lunch day at Grandma's, and that meant good food, games, and that feeling of belonging that only a large family can give. Mom dressed me in my Sunday dress, a light blue one with white polka dots that she had sewn herself, braided my hair with a matching ribbon, and made me promise not to get dirty playing before lunch. "Constance, today you look like a young lady," she said, looking me up and down with that motherly pride. "You're not going to run around with the boys like a little tomboy anymore, you hear? You're at the age where you need to learn to behave like a proper young lady." I promised I would, but deep down, I knew that as soon as I got there, I would head straight for the orchard with my cousins. The freedom we felt away from the adults' eyes was too precious to waste. We walked to Grandma's house, about 2 miles of red dirt road. I skipped ahead while my parents came behind, carrying a dish of potato salad with bacon that my mother had prepared to contribute to the lunch. My sisters, now young women of 15 and 17, came right behind, talking about the church boys who had caught their attention. When we arrived, the house was already full. Uncle Jack, the oldest of my father's brothers, had come with his wife Laura and their 3 children. Aunt Darlene, the only woman among the siblings, was there with her husband Sam and the twins, my cousins who were my age. Uncle Manuel with his wife Irene and their 2 boys. And then there was Uncle Gerald. Uncle Gerald was the youngest of my father's siblings, only 5 years older than my sister Louise. He wasn't married and lived with Grandma, helping to take care of her and the property. He had always been Grandma's favorite, perhaps because he was the youngest, perhaps because he was always around. He was a handsome man, tall, with an easy smile and a laugh that filled the house. Everyone liked Uncle Gerald. He told the best stories, knew how to do magic tricks with cards, and always had candy in his pockets to distribute among us children. I adored Uncle Gerald. When he arrived, I would run into his arms and he would spin me in the air, calling me his little princess. He seemed to care about me in a special way, always asking how I was doing in school, admiring my drawings, complimenting my braids. I felt special when I was near him, as if I were the favorite niece. And perhaps, in some sick way that I didn't understand at the time, I really was. That Sunday, lunch was served in the large yard under the apple trees. Improvised tables with boards on trestles were covered with embroidered tablecloths, and the smell of food made our stomachs growl. Baked beans, white rice, fried chicken, cornbread, mashed potatoes, stewed greens. It was a feast for the senses. Before I continue with this difficult part of my story, I'd like to ask for a moment of your time, my dear viewers. If you're enjoying my story, please leave a like and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. It helps my story reach more people who might be going through the same thing I went through. And tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. It warms my heart to know that people from all over America are listening to this old woman tell her story. After lunch, the adults stayed at the table, drinking coffee, eating apple pie, and talking about politics, about the drought, about the rising prices of beans. We children received permission to play in the orchard as long as we didn't climb the trees or damage the fruit that wasn't ripe yet. We ran to the back of the property, crazy for freedom. We played tag, hide and seek, collected fallen apples, and ate until our stomachs hurt. Time passed, and gradually the children were called by their parents. Aunt Darlene's twins had to go home early because one of them had a fever. Uncle Manuel's boys were called to help carry some things, and I was left alone in the orchard, watching a hive of honeybees I had found in an old tree trunk. That's when I heard Uncle Gerald's voice behind me. "Constance, what are you doing here all alone, little girl?" I turned around, smiling. It was Uncle Gerald, my favorite uncle. "Look, Uncle, I found a beehive, but they're the nice kind, that don't sting." He approached, looking over my shoulder. I felt his large body behind mine, his smell of cigarettes and whiskey. I hadn't noticed before, during lunch, but now I realized that he had drunk more than usual. "That's cool, Princess, but it's not good to stay here alone. There are lots of snakes in this part of the yard. Come, I'll show you something interesting inside." I took his hand without hesitation. Why would I hesitate? He was my dear uncle, the man who gave me candy, who told me stories, who made me feel special. I trusted him completely. He led me not to the main house, where everyone was, but to a smaller building at the back of the property. It was where they kept the farming tools, the grain sacks, the horse saddles. A dark place, smelling of damp earth and mold. "What are we going to see here, Uncle?" "I have a present for you, Princess. But it's a secret, okay? You can't tell anyone, or it will spoil the surprise for the other cousins." I nodded, feeling special again. A present just for me. Our secret. My child's heart accelerated with happiness. Uncle Gerald closed the door behind us. The shed became dim, the only light coming from a small window high on the wall. He led me to the back, where there was a kind of storage area with sacks of beans and corn piled up. "Close your eyes, Princess. Only open them when I tell you to." I closed my eyes, almost jumping with excitement. I expected to get a doll, perhaps, or a book of stories. That's when I felt his large, rough hands on my body. What happened in that dark shed on that Sunday afternoon that had started so happily is something that for many years I tried to erase from my memory. The memories come in flashes. His hands touching me where no one had ever touched before. His hoarse voice in my ear saying I was special, that it was our secret game, that I couldn't tell anyone, or my parents would be angry with me. I remember the smell of dust and sweat, the weight of his body on mine, the searing pain that made me scream, and his hand covering my mouth with force, almost suffocating me. I remember my sobs, my pleas for him to stop, and his look, that look that still haunts me in nightmares. An empty look, as if I weren't a person, just a thing for his pleasure. I don't know how long it lasted. For a 9-year-old child suffering such violence, it could have been an eternity. I know that at some point, the pain was so intense that my body, unable to process so much suffering, simply shut down. I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was alone in the dark shed. My blue polka dot dress, which Mom had made with such care, was torn and stained with blood. My body hurt in a way I had never felt before. There was blood running down my legs, and I didn't really understand what had happened, only knew that it had been something terrible, something forbidden, something that had broken me inside. I tried to get up, but I fell. I tried to scream, but my voice came out weak, a hoarse whisper. I dragged myself to the door, leaving a red trail on the dirt floor. When I finally managed to open the door, the light of the late afternoon momentarily blinded me. I heard voices calling me from afar. My mother, my father, looking for me. I had lost track of time. How long had I been unconscious in that shed? An hour? 2? I tried to call out to them, but I could only emit a moan. It was my sister Teresa who found me first. I remember her scream when she saw me, her face transformed by horror. Then came my parents, and the world turned into a whirlwind of frightened voices, of crying, of questions I couldn't answer. My God, what happened to her? Constance, who did this to you? Call a doctor, quick! I was carried in my father's arms back to the main house. I remember the horrified looks of everyone, my mother's screams, my grandmother's crying, and I remember Uncle Gerald standing in a corner, watching everything with an expression that mixed concern with something else that, at the time, I couldn't identify, but today, I know, was fear. Fear of being discovered. I couldn't say anything. The shock, the shame, the fear, and that terrible feeling that something precious had been stolen from me left me in a state of torpor. I could only cry, a silent and constant crying, while they wrapped me in a blanket and put me in the bed of Uncle Manuel's pickup truck to take me to the hospital in the neighboring town. The last thing I saw before we left the property was Uncle Gerald's face, watching from a distance, and his lips forming the words he had told me in the shed. It's our secret. The journey to the hospital was a nightmare. Every bump in that potholed road was like a stab in my already destroyed body. My tears dried up, not because the pain had passed, but because it seemed my body had nothing more to give. I was empty, a shell of a girl. The hospital was in Riverside, the larger town near Cedar Creek. It was a white building, 2 stories, with a large crucifix at the entrance. In those days, most of the hospitals in rural areas were run by nuns. I remember the horrified looks of the nurses when they saw me, the whispered conversations, the face of the head nun contorting in an expression that mixed pity and indignation. The girl was violated, I heard someone say, although at the time I didn't even really know what that word meant. I only knew that something terrible had happened, something that made adults lower their voices and exchange heavy looks. They took me to a small, white room. A female doctor came to examine me. I remember the relief I felt that it was a woman. Her hands were gentle, but each touch still caused me pain. She spoke softly to me, trying to calm me, but I was beyond the reach of any comfort. We'll have to operate, I heard the doctor tell my parents. The internal injuries are serious. What followed was a blur of needles, masks, bright lights, distant voices, and mercifully, darkness when the anesthesia finally took effect. When I woke up, hours later, I was in a hospital bed, with tubes and bandages all over. The room was dark, illuminated only by the dim light coming from the hallway. In the chair next to the bed, my mother slept in an uncomfortable position, her face swollen from crying so much. I wanted to call her, but my voice wouldn't come out. I tried to move my hand to touch her, but my body seemed to weigh tons. That's when I heard a sound coming from the door. Light, careful steps. My heart raced, panic taking over me. Was it him? Had he come to silence me for good? The door opened slowly, and the hallway light revealed my father's face. I had never seen my father like that. Arthur had always been a strong, unshakable man, one of those who doesn't show weakness even when the world is falling apart. But the man I saw at that door was destroyed. Red eyes, a face aged 10 years in a single day, a posture curved as if carrying the weight of the world. He approached the bed, thinking I was still asleep. With infinite care, he adjusted the blanket over me, a caress so light I barely felt it. I saw silent tears running down his face, marked by the sun and hard work. "My little girl," he whispered, so low I could barely hear. "Forgive me. I should have protected you." It was the first and only time I saw my father cry. The man who faced storms without blinking, who carried heavy logs as if they were twigs, who never bowed before the difficulties of life, was there, shattered by the pain of not having been able to protect his youngest daughter. I closed my eyes, pretending to still be asleep, I didn't want him to know I had seen him in that moment of vulnerability. Even as a child, I knew there were things that a man like my father preferred to keep private. The days in the hospital dragged on. I discovered later that I was hospitalized for almost 2 weeks. I had lost a lot of blood. The internal injuries were serious, and there were moments when the doctors feared for my life. But I was strong, as the doctor said. "This girl has the strength of an oak," she commented to the nurses. On the 3rd day, when I could already stay awake for longer, and the pain had diminished a bit thanks to the medicines, the doctor came to see me accompanied by a man in a suit who introduced himself as a sheriff. "Constance," he said, sitting beside my bed, "I know it's difficult to talk about this, but we need you to tell us what happened. Who did this to you?" I looked at my mother, who was on the other side of the bed. Her eyes were full of a mixture of pain and determination. "You can speak, daughter," she said, holding my hand. "Nobody is going to hurt you again. Daddy and I are going to protect you." Even so, the words wouldn't come. How could I tell them that my own uncle, my father's brother, my grandmother's favorite, had done something so horrible? How could I say that the man everyone loved, who told stories and did magic tricks, was a monster? But something in my mother's gaze, a firmness that said she would fight for me against the whole world if necessary, gave me courage. "It was Uncle Gerald," I whispered, so low that they had to lean in to hear. The silence that followed was absolute. I saw the shock on the sheriff's face, the painful confirmation on my mother's. She already suspected, I realized. Perhaps she had already seen something in his behavior that I never noticed. Perhaps she had noticed looks, gestures that went unnoticed by everyone else. "Are you sure, honey?" asked the sheriff, his voice now softer. "It's a very serious accusation." "I'm sure," I answered, feeling a weight leaving my shoulders as the words came out. "He took me to the tool shed. He said he had a present for me, a present just for me. And then, I couldn't continue. The tears came in a cascade, and with them, the sobs that shook my already painful body. My mother hugged me carefully, murmuring words of comfort in my ear. "It's all right, my daughter. You were very brave." Very brave. The sheriff asked a few more questions, wrote everything down in a little notebook, and then left, promising that measures would be taken. Only years later did I understand what that phrase meant. When we were alone, my mother held my hands in hers and looked at me with an intensity I never forgot. "Constance, listen carefully to what I'm going to tell you. What happened to you was not your fault. It wasn't because of your dress. It wasn't because you smiled too much. It wasn't because you were alone in the orchard. It was because your uncle is a sick man, a monster who hides behind smiles and candy. And he will pay for this, I promise." I nodded, still unable to fully believe those words. Part of me, the child part that still didn't understand the evil of the world, thought that I must have done something to provoke that situation. Maybe if I hadn't agreed to go with him, if I hadn't trusted him so much. "And there's one more thing," my mother continued, her voice now a whisper. "Your father can't know it was his brother. Not yet." "Why?" I asked, confused. "Because your father will kill him, Constance. He will kill him and go to jail, and we will be left without him, and I can't lose you both." I didn't fully understand at that moment, but I agreed. I trusted my mother more than anyone else in the world. What I didn't know was that my father was already at the door of the room, had heard everything. The expression on his face when he came in, my God, I'll never forget it. It was as if something had died inside him, something fundamental. His eyes, normally alive and bright, were opaque, like stones at the bottom of a river. "Josephine," my mother began, realizing from his look that he had heard. "Please, think of the girls, think of the family." He raised his hand, asking for silence, but not with anger. It was a tired, defeated gesture. "I've already thought, Josie. Thought a lot. And I have a plan." The way he said it, so calm, so controlled, gave me more fear than if he had shouted or broken everything in the room. It was the calm of someone who had already made an irrevocable decision, of someone who had already accepted the consequences of what he was going to do. At that moment, lying in that hospital bed, still too weak to get up on my own, with pains that no child should feel, I could not imagine what would come next. I didn't know that my father's plan wasn't simply to kill his brother, but to make him suffer as I had suffered. I didn't know that justice, when carried out by one's own hands, can be much more terrible than any legal punishment. What I knew was that nothing would be the same again. The girl who shone in the blue polka-dot dress, who ran through the orchard picking apples, who trusted adults and thought the world was a good place, had died in that dark shed. In her place, someone different was being born, someone who would carry invisible scars for the rest of her life. In the days that followed, many people came to visit me in the hospital. My aunts and uncles, cousins, neighbors, even the priest from our parish. Everyone brought gifts, words of comfort, looks of pity. Everyone, except Uncle Gerald. Of him, I only heard that he had gone to Louisville to take care of some business. Fleeing, of course. My grandmother never appeared either. I found out later that she refused to believe that her youngest son, her favorite, could have done something so horrible. Perhaps it was asking too much of a mother. Or perhaps it was just another example of how we often prefer to believe a comfortable lie than to face a devastating truth. A week after my conversation with the sheriff, when I was already improving and the doctors were talking about discharging me soon, my father came to visit me alone. He sat by my bed with that serious expression that rarely left his face since the incident. "Constance," he began, choosing his words carefully. "Next Sunday, there will be another lunch at Grandma's house." Just hearing this, I felt my entire body contract with fear. I never wanted to go back to that place, see that shed, remember. "I don't want to go, Dad," I answered, the tears already forming in my eyes. "Please, don't make me." He took my hand, with a delicacy that contrasted with those calloused fingers from so much work. "You don't have to go, my daughter. You'll never have to go there again if you don't want to. But your mother and I are going, and I need you to understand that perhaps things will happen that you will hear about later. Things about Uncle Gerald." "What things, Dad?" He hesitated, clearly divided between the desire to protect me from more horrors and the need to prepare me for what was to come. "Justice, my daughter. Justice." The word hung between us, full of dark promises, of secrets that I was still too young to understand. Even not knowing exactly what my father was planning, I felt a chill. It wasn't just fear. It was also a strange kind of relief, the certainty that, one way or another, Uncle Gerald would pay for what he had done. "When you get out of here," my father continued, "we're going to Aunt Darlene's house in Bloomfield. You, your mother, and your sisters will stay there for a while. I'll come later. And school, Dad, and the house, and my books?" He smiled, a sad smile that didn't reach his eyes. "All that can wait, daughter. Now the important thing is for you to get well and for all of us to be together, safe." That night, I dreamed of Uncle Gerald. It wasn't a nightmare like the ones I had had on previous nights, with him chasing me through the orchard, dragging me to the dark shed. It was a different dream. He was lying down, motionless, while a shadow approached him. The shadow had my father's face, but somehow it wasn't quite him. It was something older, more primitive, as if all the generations of fathers who had ever had to protect their daughters had merged into that figure that advanced slowly, inexorably, toward the sleeping man. I woke up before seeing what happened, but the feeling that stayed with me was that, whatever it was, it would be irreversible, like the loss of my innocence on that fateful Sunday, like the scars that would remain on my body and my soul, like the trust that would never be the same. 3 days later, I was discharged from the hospital. I left in a wheelchair, still too weak to walk alone. The world outside seemed strangely the same, as if it were impossible for the sky to still be blue, for the birds to still be singing, for life to still be following its course after something so terrible. In the borrowed car that would take us to Bloomfield, I looked back at the hospital that had been my home for the last 2 weeks. The doctor who had taken care of me was at the door, waving. She had said, in the last examination, that I probably would never be able to have children. The damage had been too severe. At the time, that didn't mean much to me. I was 9 years old. Children were a distant, almost abstract concept. Only much later did I fully understand what else had been stolen from me that day. The trip to my aunt's house was silent. My mother holding my hand the whole time. My sisters sitting in the front seat with my father, all immersed in thoughts they didn't share. It was as if an invisible wall had been erected between us, a wall made of pain, of guilt, of anger, and of a love so fierce it found no words to express itself. When we arrived at Aunt Darlene's house, the sun was already setting, painting the sky red and gold. My aunt received us at the door, her eyes already red from crying. She hugged each of us, holding my face between her hands when it was my turn, looking deep into my eyes as if searching for signs of damage that went beyond the physical marks. That night was the last time I saw my father before the next Sunday. He said goodbye to each of us with long hugs, whispered words, promises that soon we would all be together again. With my mother, it was different. The two moved away, talked in low voices for a long time, and when they returned, I saw that my mother had cried, but there was something else on her face, a fierce, almost wild determination. "I'll be back Sunday night," my father said before leaving. "Stay here, don't go into town, don't talk to anyone about what happened." And then he was gone, taking with him the weight of a decision that would change our lives forever. What happened that Sunday, at my grandmother's house, I only found out much later. And even then, not the complete story, just fragments, whispers, rumors that circulated for years in our region. Enough to understand that some forms of justice are as terrible as the crime that motivates them. Enough to know that my father, that gentle man who taught me to recognize types of wood by smell, had within him a darkness that only came to the surface when what he loved most was threatened. The time we spent at Aunt Darlene's house in Bloomfield dragged on like a Good Friday procession. They were days of waiting, of heavy silence, and looks laden with secrets. My aunt did her best to help me recover not only my body, but my soul as well. She prepared the foods I liked most, let me sleep with a lamp on, and never pressured me to talk about what had happened. My sisters, Teresa and Louise, took turns at my side, reading stories, combing my hair, trying to make me smile with jokes that no longer made sense to me. I saw in their eyes not only sadness, but also a new fear. The fear that the world was not the safe place they thought, that evil could come dressed as family, with a gentle voice and hands that before only offered candy. My mother hardly slept. At night, I heard her walking around the house, murmuring prayers, sometimes crying softly when she thought no one could hear. During the day, she stayed strong for me, for all of us, but her eyes had a feverish gleam, as if she were constantly calculating, planning, preparing for something I couldn't completely understand. Sunday took a long time to arrive, and at the same time came too quickly. When the sun rose that day, I felt a weight in my stomach, an obscure certainty that something irreversible was about to happen. My mother dressed carefully, choosing a simple black dress, tying her hair in a tight bun. It wasn't the festive attire of someone going to a family lunch. It was the somber outfit of someone going to a reckoning. "I'm going to meet your father," she said, kissing my forehead before leaving. "Stay with your sisters and your aunt. Don't leave the house, don't open the door to anyone, don't answer the phone. We'll be back tonight." There was a finality in those words that frightened me, as if she also wasn't sure that she would return, but was determined to go anyway. I remember holding her hand, asking her not to go, to stay with me, to let the police solve everything. She just smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and said, "Some things, my daughter, the police can't solve. Some debts only blood can pay." Those words stayed with me, echoing in my head like the church bell on Sunday mornings. What was my mother, that woman who had taught me to love my neighbor, to forgive 70 times 7, planning to do? What had my father, that man who stopped working to avoid stepping on an ant, prepared for the brother who had betrayed his trust in the worst possible way? The day dragged on in an agony of uncertainty. I felt as if I were waiting for a result I already knew, but didn't want to accept. When night finally fell, bringing with it a fine, persistent rain, my entire body was as tense as a violin string about to break. It was almost midnight when we heard the car approaching. The sound of tires in the mud, the door slamming, footsteps on the porch. My aunt went to answer, while my sisters and I and my cousins waited in the living room, frozen in an expectation that no one dared to name. My father entered first, followed by my mother. Both were soaked, not just from the rain, but from something else. Something that seemed to emanate from them like an invisible aura, a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and a silent horror that I had never seen in their faces. "It's done," my father said to my aunt, the words heavy as stones. "He will never touch any child again." No one asked what was done, what had happened in that distant house where I had lost my innocence. The silence that followed was loaded with understanding, with complicity. Something terrible had happened, something that would not be discussed in front of the children, something that would never be mentioned outside that closed circle. My father came to me, knelt in front of me, took my small hands in his, large and calloused. His eyes, which had always seemed so strong to me, were teary. "Never again, my daughter," he said, his voice choked. "Never again will anyone hurt you like that. I promise." I believed him. With all the faith a child can have, I believed that my father had fixed the broken world, that he had eliminated the monster from my nightmares, that now we could go back to being what we were before. I didn't know then that some things, once broken, never go back to being what they were, that some wounds, even after healed, continue to hurt when the weather changes, when memory comes without warning, when something, a smell, a sound, a shadow, brings it all back as if it had happened yesterday. We all slept together that night, in a pile of mattresses on the living room floor. No one wanted to be alone, not even the adults. It was as if we needed each other's presence to drive away the shadows, to confirm that we were still there, whole, together, survivors. 2 days later, we left to return to Cedar Creek. Not to our old house. That had been hastily sold to a merchant from town. We went to a new house on the other side of town, closer to the center, a house that my father had bought with the money from the sale of the old one and his savings of years. A house without memories, without ghosts, without the weight of what had happened. The months that followed were of slow reconstruction. My body healed faster than my soul. The physical injuries healed, the pain diminished. I was able to walk again, to run, to be a child in the physical sense of the word. But inside, I had aged decades in a few days. The sheriff came a few times, asked questions, wrote down answers, but nothing seemed to happen. One day, he called my parents for a private conversation. When they returned, they had a strange expression, a mixture of relief and a resigned sadness. "The case is closed," my father said that night during dinner. "Gerald was found dead in the Ohio River. Apparently he drowned. He was drunk, they say." The way he said "apparently," the way my mother lowered her eyes, told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't suicide. It was justice by one's own hands, the ancient law of an eye for an eye, the sentence executed far from courts and judges. I never knew exactly what happened that Sunday at my grandmother's house. Only many years later, when I was already an adult, did I hear fragments of the story, whispered comments, loose phrases in adult conversations they thought I wasn't listening to. Enough to form a blurred, incomplete, but terrifying image. From what I could understand, my father and mother went to Grandma Antonia's house as if it were just another family lunch. Uncle Gerald was there. He had returned from Louisville 2 days before. No one knew what had happened to me. The official story was that I had fallen from a tree in the orchard and had been seriously injured. My parents sat at the table, ate, talked, pretended normalcy, while the poison my mother had brought from the pharmacy slowly took effect in Uncle Gerald's glass. It wasn't a poison to kill. It was to paralyze, to leave one conscious, but unable to move, to speak, to ask for help. When all the other guests had left, when my grandmother had retired to rest, they took him to the same shed where he had attacked me. And there, in the same place where he had destroyed my childhood, my father, well, there are things it's better not to know in detail, not even now, so many years later. What I do know is that afterward they took him to the Ohio River. He was still alive, but weak, debilitated. The water did the rest, taking away not only his life, but also the evidence of what had happened before. The news of Uncle Gerald's death spread quickly through the region. A tragic accident, they said. A young man, full of life, taken by the waters of the river. A shame, a sadness. My grandmother was devastated, entered a deep mourning from which she never fully recovered. Her other children supported her, tried to console her, but nothing filled the void left by her youngest son, the favorite. What no one said publicly, But what everyone suspected was the truth about what he had done. In a small town like ours, secrets have short legs. The questions about why I was hospitalized, the rumors about the violence of the attack, the suspicions about who could have done something so horrible, all this circulated in whispers, in looks, in conversations interrupted when someone approached. I never spoke about the subject with my parents again. It was as if we had made a silent pact. What happened, happened. It's over. Let's move on. And that's what we did, each in our own way. My father immersed himself in work with a new intensity, as if he wanted to purge something through sweat and physical exhaustion. My mother became more devout, more rigorous in her religious practices, spending hours in church, praying for something she never mentioned. I took refuge in studies. I discovered in books a world where I could escape, where stories had happy endings, where justice prevailed without needing hands stained with blood. I studied with a determination that surprised my teachers. When I completed elementary school, I was already the best student in the school. It was at this time that I discovered my vocation. The doctor who had taken care of me in the hospital came to visit our town and stopped by our house to see how I was doing. She was impressed with my recovery, with my intelligence, with my curiosity about everything related to medicine. "You would make an excellent doctor, you know," she commented, while I showed her my notebooks, where I wrote down everything about medicinal plants that I learned from the elders in the region. The idea planted itself in me like a seed. Doctor, someone who heals, who helps, who saves lives, someone who transforms pain into knowledge, suffering into compassion. It was exactly what I wanted to be. Of course, for a poor girl from rural Kentucky in the 1950s, becoming a doctor was almost an impossible dream. But I had within me a strength that even I didn't fully know. The strength of someone who faced the worst and survived, who looked the monster in the eyes and remained standing. When I finished middle school, at 15, I already had a plan. I would go to Louisville, would stay at the house of a distant cousin of my mother, would work during the day and study at night to finish high school and try to get into medical school. My parents were reluctant at first. The idea of letting me go to the city, so far from them, terrified them after everything we had been through. But they saw my determination, my need to move forward, to transform my story into something greater than the tragedy that had marked it. "Go, my daughter," my father finally said, after many discussions. "Go and become the person you want to be. Just don't forget us, your origin, who you are." I left Cedar Creek on a March morning in 1963 with a cardboard suitcase containing everything I owned and a fear that mingled with hope in my chest. I was 16, and for the first time since that fateful Sunday, I felt that the future could be brighter than the past. Louisville received me with its intense heat, its steep hills, its smell of the river and industry, its chaotic mixture of colors and sounds. Cousin Eleanor's house was in a working-class neighborhood, on a narrow street of row houses. It was small, cramped, stuffy, but to me it represented freedom. The chance to start over, to be just Constance, not the girl who suffered that. I got a job at a pharmacy in the neighborhood, cleaning, organizing, eventually even serving customers when business was heavy. The owner, Mr. Abbott, a man of few words but generous heart, soon noticed my interest in medicine, in the properties of plants, in medications, and their effects. "Girl, you have a knack for this," he said, teaching me to prepare ointments, syrups, tinctures. "Who knows, maybe one day this pharmacy will be yours." I smiled, thanked him, but my dream was bigger. I wanted to understand the human body, its complexities, its fragilities and resistances. I wanted to know why some wounds heal without leaving a mark, while others, invisible to the eyes, continue to bleed inside, for years, for a lifetime. At night, I studied until my eyes burned, until the candles ran out, until sleep finally overcame me. Night school was hard, the teachers tired, the students more interested in dating than in learning. The subjects rushed through to complete the program. But I absorbed everything, every word, every formula, every concept, like a thirsty sponge. These were 3 intense years, years of hard work, of constant study, of privations and sacrifices, years also of discoveries, of friendships, of a freedom I had never experienced before. Years in which I learned that there was more than one path to follow, more than one way to be a woman, more than one possible destiny. In 1966, at 19, I took the entrance exam for medicine at the University of Louisville. The competition was fierce, the spots few, the candidates mostly men from wealthy families, with years of study in good schools. My chances were minimal. But I had something that many of them didn't have, a determination born of pain, an iron will forged in the fire of the worst experience a girl can live through. The day I saw my name on the list of those approved was the happiest of my life until then. I cried, as I hadn't cried since those days in the hospital. But they were different tears, tears of joy, of victory, of a hope that was finally beginning to materialize. My parents couldn't come for the enrollment. The journey was long, expensive, and they had never left rural Kentucky. But they sent a letter that I keep to this day, yellowed by time, the trembling letters of my father, who barely knew how to write, and the carefully chosen words of my mother, "Our daughter, our pride. You have achieved what none of us ever dreamed of achieving. Carry our name, our story, our love with you wherever you go. And always remember, you are stronger than everything that tried to bring you down." I read and reread that letter so many times that I knew every word by heart. It was the proof that, despite everything, despite the horror that had stained my childhood, despite the terrible justice that my parents had executed, there was love. An imperfect love, perhaps, stained with blood and guilt, but still love. Medical school was harder than anything I had faced before. The professors were demanding, the classes tough, the nights on call exhausting. Being one of the few women in the course brought extra challenges. The sexist comments, the tasteless jokes, the professors who doubted my ability. But none of this stopped me. Each obstacle only fueled my determination. In the 4th year, when I began practical internships, I discovered my true vocation, gynecology and obstetrics, bringing lives into the world, taking care of women's health, especially those who, like me, had suffered violence that left invisible but deep marks. That was what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. It was during a shift at the maternity ward, helping to bring into the world a baby of a girl of only 13, a victim of abuse like I had been, that I made a decision. I wouldn't return to Louisville after graduating. I would return to rural areas, to places like Cedar Creek, where girls like me, like that frightened young mother, had no access to adequate medical care, to information, to protection. I graduated in 1972, at 25. The ceremony was simple, but my parents were there. Older, more bent by hard work, and the weight of the secrets they carried, but with eyes shining with pride. My sisters also came, already married, with their own small children. Dr. Constance Peterson Smith, my father pronounced slowly, savoring each syllable when he received my diploma in his calloused hands. Who would have thought, huh? My daughter, a doctor. There was something in his eyes at that moment, not just pride, but also a kind of redemption. As if, somehow, my achievement justified what he had done on that distant Sunday, as if my success was proof that the blood spilled had not been in vain. I didn't return to Cedar Creek. Instead, I accepted a position in Riverside, the neighboring town, where the hospital that had treated me so many years before was located. The doctor who had taken care of me was retiring and recommended my name to replace her. "The cycle is complete," she said when she welcomed me to the hospital, now as a colleague, no longer as a patient. "The girl we saved returns to save others." I worked at that hospital for 5 years. Intense years of constant learning, of enormous challenges. Lack of resources, distance from major centers, resistance from some patients to being treated by a female doctor so young. But they were also years of deep satisfaction. Each life I helped bring into the world, each woman who managed to recover from a difficult birth, each girl I protected from a fate similar to mine by reporting abuse to the authorities. Each small victory was a balm for the old wound I still carried. It was in Riverside also that I met Anthony, the pharmacist who would become my husband. He had come from Boston to rural Kentucky as part of a government program to bring health professionals to needy areas. He was a gentle, patient man with delicate hands like I had never seen in a man before. Our courtship was slow, respectful. He knew, not in detail, but enough about what had happened to me. He knew that there were scars, both physical and emotional, that I carried. He knew that there were nights when I woke up screaming, bathed in cold sweat, trapped in nightmares that came from the past. And he knew, above all, that I might never be able to give him biological children. "It doesn't matter," he said when I told him about the last part, the tears running down my face. "There are so many children who need love, care. If we are to have a family, we will find a way." We got married in 1978, in a simple ceremony in the little church in Riverside. My father, already elderly, led me to the altar with slow but firm steps. My mother cried throughout the entire ceremony, silent tears that spoke of relief, of gratitude for seeing her daughter, the one she almost lost, finding a path to happiness. The following year, we opened our own pharmacy in Cedar Creek. I returned to the town I had left so many years before, no longer as the broken girl, but as the woman who had rebuilt herself piece by piece, scar by scar. Smith Pharmacy became the heart of the town. It wasn't just a place to buy medicines. It was a meeting point for counseling, for care. Anthony took care of the administrative part, of the preparation of formulas, of medications. I offered consultations, guidance, sometimes even small procedures for those who couldn't get to the hospital in Riverside. Over the years, we adopted 3 children, Ryan, Mary, and Caroline. 3 souls who, like me, had known the darkest side of life too early. Ryan had been abandoned at birth. Mary and Caroline were sisters, rescued from a violent father after their mother died. We gave them what was given to us and what was taken from us: love, security, a chance to start over. My parents lived long enough to meet their adopted grandchildren, to see them grow, to realize that the family they had protected with such ferocity, even by terrible means, continued to flourish, to expand, to exist through new lives, new beginnings. When my father died in 1985, I found among his belongings a yellowed newspaper clipping. It was the news of the accidental drowning of Uncle Gerald in the Ohio River, dated that fateful Sunday of 1956. He had kept that all these years as a reminder, a proof, perhaps even as a kind of penance. On the back of the clipping, written in his trembling handwriting, was just one sentence: "For Constance, I would do it all again." I kept that clipping, not as a trophy or a celebration, but as a reminder that love, even when it manifests in its darkest, most terrible aspects, is still love. That my father, that gentle man who never raised a hand to me, carried until his last day the weight of what he did to avenge me, to ensure that I could have a future. The truth is that none of us, neither my father nor my mother nor I, came out unscathed from that story. We carried the marks, visible and invisible, for the rest of our lives. The difference is that we learned to live with them, to transform them into something that, if it couldn't be called beautiful, at least could be useful, meaningful, even healing. I've come to the hardest part of this story, my dear ones, the part I've never fully told to anyone, not even to my children or my late husband, the part I've kept in the depths of my soul as a sacred secret, protected by decades of silence. What happened that Sunday, when my parents went to my grandmother's house without me, is something I only knew in fragments, in sparse pieces that I gathered over the years. Some told in moments of weakness by my mother, others whispered by my Aunt Darlene years later, still others deduced from looks, sighs, nightmares my father had on stormy nights. In that week between my hospitalization and the Sunday lunch, my parents spent hours planning every detail. I remember the nights when I heard them talking in low voices in the room next door, the loose phrases I managed to catch. "It has to look like an accident. No one can suspect. He has to feel what she felt." My mother went to the pharmacy in Bloomfield, where no one knew her. She bought a small bottle of a strong medication, the kind doctors use to calm agitated patients. Enough to leave a person unconscious, but not to kill. Death would come later, in another way. My father spent hours in the back garage of my aunt's house, sharpening a hunting knife he had brought from our house in Cedar Creek. I saw him through the crack in the door, the repetitive movement of the blade against the whetstone, the concentrated face, the fixed eyes, as if already seeing something far beyond that garage, far beyond that city, far beyond that moment. On Sunday morning, they left early. My mother wore her simple black dress, her hair in a severe bun. My father, his only good shirt, the one he only wore for Christmas and Easter masses. The two looked like they were going to a funeral, not a family lunch. "Take care of your sisters," my mother told me before leaving. "Pray for us." From what happened afterward, I can reconstruct through the fragments I gathered over the years. My parents arrived at my grandmother's house at lunchtime. They were received with the usual normality, perhaps with some questions about how I was doing. My father hugged his brothers, including Gerald, without showing anything beyond the usual affection. My mother helped set the table, serve the food, fill the glasses. It was during lunch that she did what she had planned. A moment of distraction, when everyone was engrossed in conversation and the powder from the medicine dissolved in Uncle Gerald's wine glass. He drank without noticing anything, perhaps just a slight bitter taste that wine naturally already possessed. After lunch, when everyone spread out around the property for the afternoon rest, the medicine began to take effect. Uncle Gerald felt dizzy, had difficulty keeping his eyes open. My father, attentive, noticing the signs, offered help. "Looks like you drank too much, brother," he said, his arm around Gerald's shoulders. "Come, let's have a strong coffee to clear your head." But he didn't take him to the kitchen. He took him to the tool shed at the back of the property, the same shed where I had been attacked. It wasn't a random choice. It was deliberate, symbolic. It was there that justice would be done. My mother followed them a few minutes later, making sure that no one had noticed where they had gone. She locked the door of the shed behind her. What happened in there, on that hot afternoon in 1956, I never knew with precision. There are things that perhaps it's better not to know completely. But I know that my uncle was tied to an old chair, with the ropes that my father had brought hidden in the back of the car. I know he was conscious enough to understand what was happening, but too weak to resist or scream. I know my father talked to him at length. It wasn't a blind attack of anger, an explosion of violence. It was something calculated, cold, methodical. He wanted Gerald to know exactly why he was there, what he had done, what he was about to pay for. "Do you remember what you did to my daughter in this same place?" asked my father, his voice controlled, almost calm. "Do you remember her crying, the screams, the blood?" They say the shed had small windows, covered with dark cloths, so that no one could see what was happening inside. That the only light came from a kerosene lamp, creating shadows that danced on the walls like specters. I know my mother was there, witnessing everything, sometimes participating. She, who had never raised a hand to anyone, who had taught me that violence was a sin, who had shown me the importance of forgiveness. That day, in that shed, she was another person, a force of nature, the embodiment of maternal wrath, the lioness protecting her cub, even if too late. "I want him to feel the same pain that Constance felt," she said to my father. "I want him to know what it is to be powerless, to be violated, to be destroyed from within." And so it was done. With the same knife that Uncle Gerald had used to threaten a terrified child, my father inflicted calculated injuries to cause extreme pain without killing. Injuries that would leave permanent scars, like the ones I would carry forever. Injuries in places that would mean he could never do to another child what he had done to me. But it wasn't just physical violence. It was also a psychological execution. Each cut was accompanied by words that described exactly what he had done to me, how I had felt, what had been stolen from me. It was as if my parents wanted to ensure that, in his last moments, Uncle Gerald fully understood the monstrosity of his acts. When they finished, he was alive, but only technically. He had lost a lot of blood, was in shock, on the verge of unconsciousness. That's when my father and mother took him to the car, hidden under a tarp, and drove to an isolated part of the Ohio River. Night had already fallen. The fine rain that had begun earlier now fell with more force, erasing footprints, washing away evidence, creating the perfect scenario for what seemed like an accident. My father carried his brother's nearly lifeless body to the riverbank. Uncle Gerald was still breathing, still had a pulse, but was too weak to fight, to cry for help. "Do you have anything to say before you go?" my father asked. A last moment of humanity offered to the man who had destroyed his family. I don't know if Uncle Gerald answered. If he asked for forgiveness, if he cried, if he showed repentance or maintained his hatred until the end. I only know that moments later his body was pushed into the waters of the river, carried away by the current that at that time of year, after weeks of rain, was strong enough to drag an adult man to the bottom. My parents stayed there for some time, watching the river swallow the evidence of their crime, of their revenge, of their justice. The rain fell on them, washing the blood from their hands, but not from their souls. That blood, invisible but indelible, would accompany them for the rest of their lives. The body was found 3 days later, caught in some branches at the river's edge, a few miles downstream. The injuries were attributed to the rocks and branches against which he would have hit while being dragged by the current. The verdict was quick: accidental drowning due to intoxication. Nobody questioned. Nobody investigated thoroughly. It was just another young man who had drunk too much and fallen into the river. A common story in that region at that time. When the news reached Bloomfield, where we were, I saw the expression on my father's face. It wasn't relief, nor satisfaction, nor triumph. It was something more complex, deeper. The realization of the price he had paid to avenge his daughter, not just his brother's life, but also a part of himself that would never return. The innocence of believing that the world is essentially good, that people are basically decent, that family is always a safe harbor. We returned to Cedar Creek a week later, to a new house, to try a new beginning. But the ghosts came with us. The nightmares, the silences, the distant looks of my parents when they thought no one was watching. I grew up in the shadow of that Sunday, of that revenge. Each achievement of mine, finishing my studies, entering medical school, graduating, opening my own pharmacy, was celebrated with a joy mixed with an inexplicable sadness for those who didn't know our complete story. It was as if my parents saw each step of mine as a justification for what they had done, proof that the sacrifice of their souls had not been in vain. It was worth it, my father would sometimes say, when he saw me in a white coat attending to a patient, saving a life, worth every drop of blood. He never specified which blood he was talking about, whether mine, spilled in that shed when I was only 9, or his brother's, spilled in the same place years later, or even his own, metaphorical but equally real, which he felt flowing from his heart the moment he crossed a line from which there was no return. My mother was never so explicit. She spoke through gestures, the way she held my hand during a difficult medical consultation, the pride in her eyes when I explained to a young mother how to care for her baby, the peace on her face when she saw me happy, fulfilled, despite everything. When I married Anthony in 1978, I saw my father cry for the second time in his life. The first had been in the hospital when he saw me broken by the abuse. This time, they were different tears, not of pain or anger, but of a joy mixed with relief. Relief at seeing that I had managed to overcome, that I had found love, that I had built a life beyond the tragedy. During the ceremony, when he gave me away at the altar, he whispered something that only I heard. "You won, my daughter. We won." And at that moment, I fully understood. The revenge was never just for the pain that was caused to me. It was also a declaration, a shout to the universe. She will survive. She will overcome. She will have a full life despite what was done to her. And the man who tried to destroy her will not be here to see it. When I adopted my 3 children, Ryan, Mary, and Caroline, in the mid-1980s, I saw on my parents' faces something I had never seen before. Peace. As if the cycle finally closed, as if the wound opened decades ago finally began to truly heal. These little ones, my father would say, playing with his adopted grandchildren, are the proof that good wins in the end, that after the darkest storm, the sun always shines again. My parents died as they lived after that Sunday. Together, united by a bond that went beyond conjugal love, a bond forged in blood and shared secret. My father went first, in 1985, from a heart attack while working in the carpentry shop. My mother followed him less than a year later, as if she no longer knew how to exist without him. Without that silent presence that carried half the burden they both shared for almost 3 decades. I was left with their memories, with their complicated legacy, with the certainty that they were imperfect, fallible, human to the core, capable of the deepest love and the most savage hatred, of the fiercest protection and the most calculated revenge. I'm not here to judge what they did. I'm not here to say if it was right or wrong. I'm here only to tell the story, so that you who are listening understand that life is rarely black and white, that people are rarely saints or demons, that love can manifest in ways that frighten us, that confuse us, that leave us questioning everything we thought we knew about ourselves. What I know is that I carry within me both the girl who was broken in that shed and the woman who was rebuilt piece by piece, through the brutal and imperfect love of my parents, through my own determination not to be defined by the worst thing that happened to me, through the lives I helped save, the children I helped bring into the world, the children I raised with all the love I could give. Today, at 78, looking back at the long and painful road I've traveled, I don't just feel the pain, the horror, the injustice. I also feel gratitude for the parents I had, who, despite their terrible methods, loved me beyond reason, for the husband I found, who showed me that not all men are monsters, for the children I raised, who gave me the chance to create a family based on respect and genuine love, for the career I built, which allowed me to transform my pain into healing for others. And I feel, above all, a quiet and firm certainty. I survived. Not just physically. I survived with my soul intact, with my capacity to love preserved, with my faith in life renewed daily through the small miracles that surround us when we have eyes to see. My dear friends, thank you from the bottom of my heart for accompanying me on this difficult journey through my past. If my story touched your heart in any way, please leave a like and subscribe. This helps stories like mine reach more people who might be going through the same thing or know someone who is. Because that's what I've learned after all these years. Life can break us in unimaginable ways, but the decision to pick up the pieces and rebuild something new, something beautiful, something meaningful, that decision is entirely ours. It's the only power that no one can take from us, no matter what they do to us. I am Miss Connie from the pharmacy, and this was my story. May God protect each one of you watching this video. Amen.